The embargo has finally lifted, so let's talk a bit about a brand new theatrically released rom-com. One Night Only has finally arrived.
Your chin could plow a field.
Your legs don't make any sense.
Your hairline doesn't make any sense.
But I always make a cock-up if I see him. Well, there's never any cock-up involved, if you see what I mean.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve. I'm a film critic and a very loud proponent of supporting your local cinema and your local library. Today I'm going to be reviewing a brand new romantic comedy called One Night Only. I have already published an interview I did with this film's director, Will Gluck. Please go and show that video some love because I had so much fun doing that. One Night Only stars Monica Barbaro and Callum Turner as the main couple who exist in a world where a law has been passed that forbids premarital sex except for one night a year, and more specifically, a 12-hour window. The film is set in New York City, following in the footsteps of many other iconic films, be they rom-coms or any other genre. If you are not already familiar with the film's director, Will Gluck is best known for directing films like Easy A, Anyone But You, Friends with Benefits, and the 2014 Annie film. Will Gluck first appeared on my channel back in 2023 when I was covering Anyone But You because I really wanted there to be more theatrically released rom-coms, especially modern literary adaptations, which Anyone But You was. I did that film's press junket, and being able to review yet another Will Gluck rom-com was a most welcome addition to this year's roster of theatrical releases. As I already said, I was able to interview Will again. At this point, I would say he is unofficially a friend of the channel. Technology impeding human connections.
You're way too smart for this. You should be asking dopey questions. I'm not used to this.
One Night Only originates from a #1 screenplay from The Blacklist, which is a screenwriting submission that happens every year, and if you are rated favorably upon submitting your screenplay to The Blacklist, you might be able to have a better chance at getting your screenplay picked up and produced. What's evident in watching One Night Only, though, is how much of Will Gluck's personal sense of humor and signatures as a storyteller have been woven into the finished result. I happen to know how to recognize a fair bit of this because of how much research I did into Will's work 3 years ago in anticipation of participating in the Anyone But You press junket. For one, he is very meta, so you will see a lot of references in One Night Only that are doing things like connecting back to previous works of his. You will also see his daughters and his father cameo, as they always do in his films. But he's also particular about how the worlds he creates in the stories he tells need to be such that his characters know about pop culture, and they will be willing to reference it wherever it makes sense for them to do so. Ali's job is a prime example of that, as she sings musical covers with rewritten lyrics for commercials. I more or less expected that this was going to deliver much of what I want to see in a rom-com on the big screen. Chemistry, banter, a genuine spark between the leads. What I wasn't expecting, though, is for the film to be as clever and satirical in its storytelling as it is. It's not just about putting two people together who are going to have romantic chemistry and banter, a brief separation before reuniting, roll credits. It's very dialed in to how nightmarish and lonely it feels for people who are trying to date and find a meaningful connection. Not to such an extreme extent that you're switching genres and becoming a horror film, but pretty much as far as you can go without switching genres. Nowadays, though, how are a substantial portion of people making a connection? Dating apps. But here's the thing about dating apps. It's incredibly boring to watch people texting or DMing each other in the film medium. However, imagine the insufferable trial and error process of trying to have these awkward introductions, and very quickly, people reveal themselves to be not at all what you're looking for. That's what One Night Only is showing, except instead of watching characters texting the entire time and having those disasters happen in DMs, you're almost always seeing characters speak to one another, and when you have skilled actors, entertaining material, and everyone is approaching the job ready to make it fun, you know it's going to deliver. Moreover, we lean into the heightened premise the just slightly exaggerated world. And yes, this is only slightly exaggerated, but it's just enough to give the story an extra jolt of energy and urgency. So it's not meandering like literally every popular on Book Talk romance book tends to be nowadays.
I'm bored.
There is a ticking clock for most of One Night Only. It makes the characters more willing to act ridiculous. There's room for more physical comedy, which I love to see. Given the title of the film and its premise, one might expect that a short duration like this could feel like it's not enough to tell an effective rom-com, that you need more time to follow your main couple. But it actually works really well. The story is so eventful, it covers a lot of places across New York City, there's so much running around, and overall it's effective in making sure that you get to know these characters and the connection they have is believable. It's a story that documents the here and now of where the audience is in time and culture, but also delivers fun. There is whimsy, physical comedy, and romantic chemistry in abundance, and an unexpectedly clever satirical point of view on the tribulations of modern dating. Highly recommend it. I'm still annoyed, by the way, that people let You, Me, and Tuscany flop at the box office. I know that the people who watch me, at least semi-regularly, they showed up to support that in the cinema because they were telling me so in the comments of my review of that film, and they really enjoyed seeing it. But the fact that the only big rom-coms we have had released this year in the cinema are both from Universal Pictures, we absolutely cannot have both of these flopping at the box office. We already get hardly any rom-coms in theaters nowadays to begin with, but when we do, they're fabulous. One Night Only, before that was You, Me, and Tuscany, before that was Eternity, before that was Lisa Frankenstein, all excellent.
You were incredible at the party tonight.
No one was listening.
I was.
Now I want to talk about some of the specifics of One Night Only, so that does mean that we are entering a bit more of the spoiler territory, although with a rom-com you more or less know how it's going to end. I read an interview, I don't remember which one, but it was when I was researching to prepare to interview the film's director, and there was something said about how he went out of his way to really build the lore and the logistics of what the world of the story looks like under this particular legislation. If you watched my interview with Will, or if you've already seen the film, then you will already know that there is a detail that's mentioned about how queer folks already have workarounds to deal with this legislation. Will said, when I asked him about this detail, that there are all types of people participating in this One Night Only of debauchery, but Allie's roommate is the one who opts not to participate, opting instead to make $5,000 babysitting a rambunctious adolescent. Supply and demand, as it were. If you pay close attention to when Allie is having a conversation with an insufferable tech bro, and he's explaining how this law is enforced, there are these biometric tattoos people have on them, which monitor certain chemicals being released in the brain and the body, and if the system catches two people finishing their rounds within immediate proximity of one another, I forget the exact distance, but close enough for law enforcement to presume that you're both being intimate.
Intimate? Is that how old people say sex?
And moreover, if those users are not registered as being married, then that's how you get caught and arrested for breaking this One Night Only law. If you think about the type of forward-thinking people in the broader queer community who have already figured out their workarounds, presumably this is going to result from those people also being the ones who are more knowledgeable, open, and communicative about the variety of ways to be intimate with others. And if both of the people don't set off the biometric tattoo with their, shall we call them happy chemicals being released in the brain, then you would presumably not set off the alarms in the law enforcement system. What I find interesting about this idea is that the more that you think about the premise of this film, the more you start to realize that it doesn't feel like something as far removed from the reality the audience lives in compared to this seemingly fictional setting that these characters are living under. Although it's a rom-com where we tune in first and foremost for romantic chemistry and banter, the whimsy and shenanigans, the physical comedy, of course, which is always welcome here. You have these very clever call-outs of living under a politically conservative techno-surveillance state. My regular viewers don't complain in my comments of my reviews if and when I bring up various socio-political topics while discussing a work of fiction because my ideology is not a secret. However, I don't bring those ideas up in every review I do because it really just depends on what the story is. Sometimes, especially before I started divesting from using as much social media as I used to, I would see this point being brought up about how some people claim to just want to go see something escapist and not be reminded of the miseries of living in the real world. Far too often when I see that complaint being made, it comes across more like people trying to justify a lack of or refusal to engage in critical thinking skills, but perhaps we're not ready to call that out today. I find it very impressive with a film like One Night Only, where it can toe this line of offering the fun and whimsy that the romance girlies want to see in a big theatrical rom-com released in cinemas, while also having these elements of incorporating how difficult and dystopian the real world feels to live in. But then, in the end, the film is offering that bit of hope to the audience within the framework of what type of story this is. My regular viewers know that I love to see a movie where the people rise up and fight back, speak truth to power, all of that sort of thing. But with a movie like One Night Only, it's really about giving that hope in the end that despite how dystopian things feel, how easily we are getting icked out by people who are shallow, uninformed, selfish, and so on and so forth, that meaningful connections and relationships can still be formed. Would I like One Night Only more if it ended with people storming the buildings that hold whatever data centers are stalking people's biometrics, destroying all of those buildings and equipment and doing redacted retribution against the politicians and tech bros who enacted and profited off of this One Night Only legislation in the first place? Of course I would. But it's a rom-com, so first and foremost, I am tuning in and wanting to root for the main couple. I want to have fun with them, and I did. If I want to see people falling in love and engaging in armed struggle against imperialists, I will just rewatch James Cameron's Avatar films for the 50,000th time. With One Night Only, I really appreciate the smaller moments of genuine connection between Owen and Ali. Some of that is visible in the trailer and early promotional material that's already been released. When he says the line about her being cute, when she says that no one was listening to her singing and he says that he was, that's what the romance girlies want. Just have people say and show what they really feel. Be emotionally open and earnest and have fun with it. I really do find it astounding how much the industry overlooks the romance genre or romantic fiction, and then they act surprised every time a romance or romantic comedy type of work of fiction blows up in popularity with measurable analytics that are very high. The fact that it was Will Gluck himself who brought us a massive hit, Anyone But You, only a couple of years ago, I really thought at the time that more studios were going to try to capitalize on that film's success because that's what big studios and big companies do. They love to rush to be second to do something. One movie will innovate or revive or popularize something, and then everyone else scrambles to try to follow that trend. Where are the trend-following rom-coms of Anyone But You? How many rom-coms did we have in cinemas after that? Specifically from Hollywood studios. Lisa Frankenstein, Eternity, You, Me, and Tuscany, and now One Night Only. In almost 3 years, we have 4 rom-coms, and one of them is from the same director of Anyone But You. That's a joke. You have to be joking. And Callum Turner is in 2 of those 4 movies. No offense to Callum Turner, by the way. He was great in both of these rom-coms. But I would also like to see a larger variety of performers in the 10-course meal of theatrical rom-coms. I should have 3 or 4 new rom-coms in the theaters annually. Callum Turner and Monica Barbaro are being cute, and they're falling in love, despite the greatest obstacle of all, living in the States.
Look, I mean, United States is a fantastic place to live, but New Zealand is just stunningly...
And if you think me referring to the more political aspects of One Night Only's story and premise is overreaching, let me just remind everyone, and this is a spoiler, when Owen goes back to the apartment, because his on-again, off-again girlfriend is calling him back to the apartment, she couldn't go through with her casual hookup with Salvatore Shohofer Lopez, and she goes off on this tangent about things going wrong between them, and what does she say to Owen? She says, "Thanks, Obama." And when he points out to her that the one night only law has only been in place for the last 3 years, she tries to wave off Owen's point by saying something about, well, it's a boomerang. Translation, she's politically and ideologically not where he is. A bit of a red flag on his part for having been about to propose to her when they seemingly have such a vast ideological difference between them, but it's a reminder in a pivotal moment of the story that this is dialed into how things are going in the real world outside of the story. It's a satirical funhouse mirror reflecting back to us the winter of our discontent. That doesn't mean we're not allowed to still find some joy and watch cute people fall in love. Owen and Ally are both really endearing. They're easy to root for, but they're not those insufferable blank slate type of romantic leads that I seem to encounter every time I try to read a book that gets popular on social media and is greenlit for an adaptation just because it's sold well. These characters feel like real people, as in, they feel like they have dimensions, fears, insecurities, personalities, and both Callum and Monica perform them with all of the charm and heart that you would want to see in a rom-com. A couple of other details I would like to point out. Casting Molly Ringwald in this movie makes perfect sense to me because I remember Will Gluck saying in an interview that I watched while I was doing research that he's a John Hughes fan. That's very on brand of him as a Gen Xer. Moreover, LeVar Burton in a crop top. If you're watching spoilers and you didn't hear me say that the first time, permit me to repeat myself. LeVar Burton in a crop top. What could be more fun and whimsical than LeVar reading Rainbow Burton showing up to the big event of a new rom-com releasing in cinemas wearing a crop top? And then the bubble wrap, because we needed more mayhem and we needed to make a joke about ASMR. This movie is locked in. It's 30, flirty, and thriving. Another bit of trivia, the older gentleman in the police station who is being brought in for refusing to wear what he calls a love glove, that is Will Gluck's father. Presumably this is how we find out where Will Gluck got his sense of humor from. Would your parents or grandparents be ready to engage in such tomfoolery for the movie-going masses to see? Maybe some of you would say yes, but I know it's not all of you. This was giving me the romance and comedy that I was hoping for. The world of the story feels real, lived in, and tangible. The satire, as I've already said, was a welcome surprise, and I will have you know, even though I rewatched this multiple times while my press screener was still active, I'm still going to go see it again in cinemas because I want to experience it on the big screen because that's the superior way to experience a really fun rom-com. I also happen to love the references this film was dropping. Ally singing All Out of Love by Air Supply with a potential date of hers. I quite literally learned about that song because of a rom-com. Perhaps you've heard of it. The Wedding Date. The postcard in One Night Only of an Affair to Remember. That's a movie that my life has been sending me towards for years. Childhood, adolescence, I watched How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, which references Sleepless in Seattle. When I finally got around to watching Sleepless in Seattle, that movie heavily references An Affair to Remember. Upon my watching that, what do I learn? That film is a remake of another film that is, I guess, the same plot, I don't know, but it's by the same director. The film's called Love Affair. I still haven't seen that one, but I'm sure we will get to that eventually. I have a lot on my watch list, which never gets any shorter. If you needed me to say this directly, go see One Night Only at the cinemas. There are far too few rom-coms releasing theatrically, and the ones that do, they're worth showing up for if you are a fan of the genre.